Tak for, at I kom. Og jeg ved godt, det er fredag og alt muligt. Det er super vigtigt. Mange af de ting, der sker rundt omkring i verden. Vi har lavet den her Facebook-gruppe, som I kan gå ind og tjekke på, der hedder Randers for Fred, hvor vi kommer til fremover og annoncere alle de her emner, som er sådan lidt out in the fringe i forhold til, hvad det er for en diskurs, mainstream-medier ønsker, at vi skal have os. Men så prøv at holde øje med os der. Men jeg vil bare sige velkommen til Christopher Bollyn, som startede som journalist over i Washington D.C., hvor han begyndte allerede dagen efter den 11. september at stille nogle spørgsmål, og vi kunne hurtigt vide, at det var ikke noget, man snakkede om, de her ting. Men der skulle lidt mere til for at holde sådan som Christopher nede, og i dag så har han så rejst verden rundt og snakket om 11. september og krigen mod terror. Så nu vil jeg bare have ordet til Christopher.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the people who have helped arrange this event. My name is Christopher Bollyn, and as said, I'm a journalist in the United States in Washington, D.C. when 9/11 happened. I'm going to be speaking about tonight the Scandinavia and the war on terror. The thing is that my research into September 11th began the week of September 11th, the day it happened. And I realized very early on, in the first days, that the US government and the media were not going to talk about certain aspects of September 11th. There were certain things that were going to be omitted, not discussed. And that the government was going to take the country to war based on this false narrative, the story they were giving the American people, which had been prepared in advance. And based on this false narrative, we were going to go to war in Afghanistan and across the Middle East. President George Bush said a few days later that this crusade, this war on terror, will take a while. And Dick Cheney and Rumsfeld and Bush, they spoke about a war that would be open-ended, going on for decades. And that was very frightening to hear. And I realized that this was all being done based on a false story. So the two go together. I wrote a book called Following 9/11, The Deception That Changed the World. And here I am in Hollywood at the Oscars with my one-man protest. Limousines are driving by. You want to show them that ending the war on terror, solving 9/11 ends the war. And here I am presenting to we had a citizens' grand jury. We had this idea that if we had a citizens' grand jury and presented evidence, we could indict some of the people in the government who were behind the 9/11 atrocity or involved in it. I was an investigative journalist in Washington, D.C. when it happened. My specialty, my degree is in history. My specialty is Israel and Palestine. And I wrote the Solid 9/11 books. It took a long time to write them. The little book is what I have. I have a few copies with me here. This is my analysis of the September 11th attacks. Put them in geostrategic, historical context. This is unique. This book is unique in the 9/11 research in historiography because I talk about who did 9/11 and why they did it. Not just what happened, but who's behind it and why it was done. And as we now, with 15 and a half years of hindsight, we can see that 9/11 was done to bring the war on terror into reality, the war that we're now engaged in. And that's the book. And the essence of this deception is that it's a dual deception. It's like two sides of a counterfeit coin. On one side, you have the 9/11 lies, the narrative, the story, the myth, if you will. On the other side, you have the war on terror. And they go together. So 9/11 was actually a highly sophisticated false flag terror atrocity that was designed to create fear and rage. They used something called shock and awe. scare the hell out of people like this. And it was designed to create this fear and rage in the American population and in the world so that the people in the public would support the idea of a war on terror, which is in fact an Israeli Zionist war strategy in disguise. So it's not that 9/11 fell out of the clear blue sky and war on terror followed. Rather, if you'll see the history tonight, the war on terror was planned decades in advance, starting already in the late 70s. And then in order to make it become operational, in order to make it start, they needed something like 9/11 to get the Americans worked up to the point that they would go to war. It's a big deception. So 9/11 was a policy coup that brought us the war on terror and a series of costly wars. You know, first comes to mind Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria and Yemen and Somalia and Libya and Mali. It goes on and on and on. And if you look at the history of the last 15 years, you'll see that the United States and its allies have laid waste to a whole series of countries across North Africa and the Middle East with no reaction from the people of Europe or the United States. What's most peculiar about this 15-year history we've lived through so far, is that our countries have been engaged in war. Countries like Denmark, who haven't been engaged in wars for centuries, suddenly our peace-loving, progressive populations are accepting going to war against countries with whom we have no grievance. There's no American grievance against the people of Iraq or Afghanistan or Mali or Somalia or Sudan, etc. There's no American interest there. So why are the people, why are so few people here tonight? Why are our populations apathetic? Because they're deceived. They've swallowed the deception, hook, line, and sinker. So the current phase of the war on terror, which is still going on, is called Operation Enduring Freedom. Oh, this is the first part, Operation Enduring Freedom. This is the first part. The current one is Operation Inherent Resolve. Excuse me. This is the one they did in Afghanistan. You see that after 9/11, with no evidence whatsoever to make their case, the Bush administration went to war claiming that Al-Qaeda, with protection of the Taliban, was behind the attacks. And the United States, the next week, went to war in Afghanistan. They decided in the White House on September 11th at night that they would go to war in Afghanistan. This was prepared in advance. And NATO went on to take control of the operation, and as you see, there's a whole coalition of countries. The Danish flag is right there. And hundreds of thousands of Americans and Europeans have been involved in this war. What happened was, although it was a crime, a terror atrocity, the U.S. government under George Bush called it an act of war. That's a legal term. By calling it an act of war, it meant that it would not go to the law enforcement to make a case, to prove guilt. It wouldn't go to the courts. It would go to the military to get justice. Because they said that these 19 Arabs attacked us from Afghanistan. Therefore, we will go to war with those group, the Al-Qaeda group, and the country that's harboring them, Afghanistan. I want to point out that this quote on the side is from Larry Johnson, the Deputy Director of Counterterrorism. He said that these guys, he's talking about the 19 Arabs, let's take questions afterwards. He says that these guys were just committed zealots and willing to give it up for the cause without being key members of the network. They were told what to prepare for, what to train for. They were not the ones calling the shots. And he said, we don't have anything in history to compare with this. The only thing that comes close to it is a former Soviet intelligence operation. He said that 1 week after 9/11. Oh no, 14 days. So the United States, in October, started dropping bombs on the poorest country in Asia with no actual reason to go to war. And we've been there ever since. And as you may recall, 2 days ago, there was the largest terrorist bomb in years in Afghanistan. It killed about 100 people. And the war in Afghanistan goes on, grinds on. You have to ask, what is the purpose? The United States is spending $4 million every hour of every day. So that's about $100 million a day. What for? What did we lose in Afghanistan? Or what do we hope to find? And you can see that terrorism has spiked after the 9/11, after the United States invades the countries. The invasion, of course, provokes more terrorism, and they create more terrorism. So, as I say in this poster, 9/11 is a peace movement, because 9/11 was carried out to start the war on terror, which is a global war of aggression, terrorism, and conquest. You might ask yourself, for example, in Libya, where did all the gold go? Gaddafi had a huge storage of gold. Gaddafi had $285 billion in Swiss banks. Where did that all go? Today the country's destroyed. That's aggression, that's conquest. 9/11 was designed to trick us into supporting this open-ended and criminal war agenda, which, as you see now, 16 years later, will go on. With Donald Trump, it seems that it's going to go on further. He's not going to stop it. Some people hope that he would stop it. It's not stopping. And it won't stop unless we stop it, until the people stand up and stop it. The fraudulent war on terror has cost trillions of dollars and ruined the lives of millions of people, and it's our civic duty to stop it. These are protesters in San Francisco who are clearly aware that the war on terror is a fraud, and that the fraud of the war on terror is connected to the 9/11 cover-up. How has Scandinavia been affected by this fraudulent war on terror? Well, first of all, you're militarily involved. All the Scandinavian countries have been militarily involved in combat since 2007 or 8. Denmark was one of the first countries to actually join in Afghanistan and Iraq. Denmark has been very, gung-ho, ready to fight, ready to join, ready to go wage war. Quite unusual for Scandinavia, actually. And you've also been affected by a massive influx of refugees from war-ravaged nations. Now, when I say that these wars are of dubious legality, I'm being kind. They're actually criminal wars. So Denmark and Norway and Sweden are basically using their prestige, their moral prestige, the flag, to cover for a criminal act. They're part of it. And this will affect Scandinavia in future. You've lost that prestige that you once had. And the rest of the world looks at you and says, wow, if the Norwegians are going into Syria, it must be okay. We can do it too. And the third effect, of course, is that the negative and the propaganda against Russia and the hostility that has been cultivated between the West and Russia only hurts us. Only hurts us. The United States and Western Europe should have friendly and good ties with Russia at this point. There's no reason not to. And it would be very beneficial to countries like Denmark and Norway and Sweden, Germany, to be selling technology and trading goods with Russia and having a lively intercourse with Russia. Okay, Denmark. Denmark is among the countries that contributes the most per capita to the fight against Daesh. Daesh is, of course, just this name for ISIS. In military and civilian terms. But what is Daesh? Where does Daesh come from? It's from the U.S. prison camp in Iraq called Camp Bucca. This is it was called the catalyst of the terror group ISIS. And this Abu Ahmed, a senior official of ISIS, told The Guardian a few years ago, he said, if there was no American prison like Bucca in Iraq, there would be no ISIS. Daesh. No. Bucca was a factory, he said. It made us all. It built our ideology. This is a picture of Camp Bucca. Now we have at the airports this harassment, if you will. You're treated like a suspect of terrorism when you walk into an airport. You have to go through this battery of investigations. You have to take off your shoes and your pants and your belts and your computers. This summer they say we won't be able to take laptops to America anymore in the cabin because the Israelis have found out that there's a way to make that a bomb. And that was what Trump leaked to the Russians the other day and caused a big to-do. But so it gets more and more and more bizarre. And I can tell you, with these guys in America, if you crack a joke or smile, you're likely to find yourself getting arrested. They have no sense of humor. And here's the rivers of refugees that have been flowing into Europe in the last few years. This is, I think, 2015. Currently, the number of displaced people in Europe and in the Middle East is 65 million people across the whole region, the highest number ever recorded. So we have refugee flows in Europe today that Europe has not seen since World War II. And I live in Sweden, in little town Jönköping. We have thousands of people from Afghanistan and Syria, Iraq, and we have many, Sweden has tens of thousands of unaccompanied minors. Children, boys, mostly boys who came from Iran and Syria, who are less than 18 years old when they came. This is organized, but I mean, my wife teaches some of these kids. And then the thing is that the media is cultivating this anti-Russian hostility. It's completely artificial. There's no reason, like I said, for the United States or Western Europe to be antagonistic to Russia. But it's the same controlled media that supports the lies about 9/11 and the war on terror, who are behind the anti-Russia propaganda, as you see here, Fox News, NBC, CBS, CNN, BBC. We are being subjected to it on a daily basis. And in Sweden, where I live, a week doesn't go by when you don't read a headline about how the Russians are planning to conquer Gotland, for example. Or they have plans to conquer southern Sweden. It's nonsense. But what they're basically selling in those papers is fear. They want the Swedish people to be afraid of Mother Russia. So now the latest phase of the war on terror is this thing I said, Operation Inherent Resolve. This is the military operation against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Currently manifested in Raqqa in Syria, where they're attacking, and Mosul. As you see, the Danes are involved in the middle of the country, and in the north of the country, you have the Norwegians and Finns. And in the north of the country, in both Syria and Iraq, you have this Kurdish area. This is Kurdish area here. And as you see, Mosul and Raqqa are just on the edge of that perimeter of that Kurdistan. This is called the Kurdish area, future Kurdistan. And the Americans are arming this group to have a large state, basically. And there's a huge oil field right here. It's called it's a mega field right here, this black line. And this is a pipeline that flows up into the oil from this area, flows up into a pipeline in Turkey and to Ceyhan, over here to the coast where it's, so oil from Kurdistan goes to Iraq, goes into Turkey, excuse me, and comes down here and is sent out. And as I think that when they conquer Mosul, if this is conquered by the Kurdish forces, and likewise with Raqqa, most likely these cities will become part of Kurdistan. What else? Speculation on my part. Here is the Danish forces in Syria or Iraq. And as you see, 400 Danish soldiers are employed or deployed as part of the coalition efforts. They're training. And here's what your Prime Minister Rasmussen. He says the Islamic State is a brutal and ruthless terrorist organization. A powerful response from the outside world is needed to defeat it. But you have to understand that these radical terrorist groups that we're fighting have been created by us to be the boogeyman for the war. So that you move, then what they do is they basically move that card where they want to attack. And then when the Americans attack, they attack infrastructure, power plants, water facilities, schools, hospitals. And then the Al-Qaeda group or the Islamic State just moves on to the next place. Here is the Danish Foreign Minister Samuelsen said this year in January that Denmark will deploy up to 60 special forces to fight Islamic State. So you're engaged in the fight. And of course, in the fight, there's consequences. Denmark has sent 9,500 troops to Afghanistan in the 11 years they were there. 37 were killed in combat. 6 died outside combat. 214 wounded. So you have the highest loss per capita within the coalition. Here's a picture from just last week with a Norwegian who's flying his flag backwards too, in the current fashion. And here the Norwegians are coming into Syria against the wishes of the Syrian government. That's angripp. That's an aggression. They're not invited there. There's no reason for Norwegian troops to be there, except that the Americans and the British said, come on in, take control of the border with us. Again, they're using the Norwegians to the more the merrier. There's security in numbers. Here's the Swedish operation. You see, those are all the countries that are involved in the anti-ISIS coalition. 67 nations. 67 nations plus the United States fighting a little militia that has Toyota trucks and some machine guns. And they say this war is going to take for years. Why? Why? Especially when you've armed them. Turn off the weapons supply and the war will be over tomorrow. And here's some of the, I don't know if you can call it kickback or payback or show. This is in Stockholm. And what happened there the other day when a truck driven by some Uzbeki guy crashed into Orleans. The cost of the U.S. action against ISIS is costing the United States taxpayers $615,000 per hour. It's cost over $15 billion so far. War on terror has cost the U.S. taxpayers $2.5 trillion. But what is the war on terror? Does the Danish media explain that to you? And where did it come from? When did Western people, Western nations start acting like this? Well, the war on terror is actually an Israeli strategy. This is usually when some people get the war on. Pushed by Netanyahu since 1979 to get the United States military into the Middle East to wage war on behalf of the Zionist state. Now, I'll prove that point in a second. This is the evolution of an Israeli war strategy. A stratagem is a clever device, a machination, a trick to trick your enemy into serving you. These are some of the masterminds of Israeli terrorism back in the 1950s. This is on the far left is Shimon Peres, and then a man named Pinchas Lavon with sunglasses, and the guy with the patch on his eye, that's Moshe Dayan. And this photograph was taken 1 month after they were busted for having done a false flag operation called the Lavon Affair, named after Pinchas Lavon, in Egypt, when they had Egyptian Jews, terror cells, who made nitroglycerin bombs and took them to libraries like this one. American Library or British Library, cultural institutions belonging to those two countries in Egypt, in Alexandria and Cairo. Well, one of the bombs went off prematurely and they caught the guy and he fessed up, he confessed, and the Israelis were caught. And these were the three guys that ran the operation, the three on the left. Shimon Peres. And the prime minister at the time, this had been done unknown to him. It was unbeknownst to him this operation had been done to the Prime Minister Moshe Sher. And Moshe Sher wrote his book in 1955 because this is when the terrorists basically took over the state of Israel. And he said that Peres shares the same ideology as Pinchas Lavon. He wants to frighten the West into supporting Israel's aims, which is where we are right now. This is the stage we're on right now. We, the West, the American people, the Europeans, are being frightened on a weekly basis by some terror atrocity someplace in order to make them, steal them and say, we have to fight these crazy Muslims. We have to go in Afghanistan or Syria or wherever it is. We have to fight these people. They want to feed this. So they created the bonfire with 9/11. Now they just need to throw a stick on fire every few minutes. And those sticks are the repeated terror attacks we're being exposed to. This is when the hard-nosed, the really hard-nosed terrorists came to power in Israel. I was living there at the time, 1977. This is when the Likud came to power. The Likud was headed by the man in the middle, Menachem Begin. And those are two of his close buddies, Ariel Sharon on the left and Yitzhak Shamir. And they came to power. The next year, the very next year, 1978, one of the most senior Israeli intelligence agents, this man here, his name is Arnon Milchan, speaking with Ezra Weizman there and saying there, so he made this film. And the film shows, obviously, the climactic scene is a Boeing 747 crashing into the Pan Am building in New York City. So, when you consider this kind of ideation of 9/11, you ask, was this a coincidence that he made films like this, or is this prescience? Is he showing that he knows something? Here he is in the middle. Arnon Milchan is a Hollywood producer who made JFK, Pretty Woman, Brazil. Brazil is a very interesting movie. We've seen that made in 1986, made with Terry Gilliam, in which he portrays, the film depicts a future society, future European society, where the country is fighting a war on terror in far regions of the world, and the population is exposed to terrorism on a daily basis. The movie was made in 1986. It's a very disturbing film to watch. It'll really mess with your head to watch it. But this is him, and those are his good friends, Netanyahu and Shimon Peres. Shimon Peres is the head of Israel's nuclear arsenal. You should know that. And he's the father of a lot of Israeli terrorism. That Arnon Milchan is a business partner with Rupert Murdoch, who owns Fox News. And together they own a TV company. And they made this film in the year 2000, in which a Boeing passenger plane flies right into the World Trade Center. And at the very last second, the very last minute, the pilot regains control of the plane, which has been remotely hijacked, and he pulls back on and he gets control of the plane, and he just narrowly misses hitting the World Trade Center. And this movie was filmed on Fox TV 6 months before 9/11. And then you have people like Condoleezza Rice and George Bush saying, who could possibly imagine something like this happen? To watch TV. So in 1979, Bibi Netanyahu here quit his job at a Rothschild company called Boston Consulting Group in the United States. And this is with his father. And he went back to Israel, and he started an institution with his father called the Netanyahu Institution. Named after his brother John. And in 1979, in July, they had a big 3-day conference in which they shifted, they tried to shift, it's called a propaganda offensive. They tried to shift public attention from civil rights to international terrorism. But what the real kicker here is that in 1979, when they wanted to push this on propaganda, they chose to blame all the terrorism in the world on the Soviet Union. They said the Soviet Union was behind all the terrorism in the world because that fit with their desire to have hostility between the superpowers. And George Bush Sr. spoke on the final session. And this is from the conference. Very little was written about it. This book, International Terrorism, was composed by Netanyahu. This contains the speeches that were given at that conference. But these group of influential, powerful people joined to launch an international propaganda offensive. What that means is that they had all these journalists and politicians in the room, and then the following week, editorials started coming out, and propaganda came out in the newspapers around the world saying international terrorism is now the problem, and the West has to start fighting it. So this was basically the birthday of the War on Terror, 1979. And it was started by Menachem Begin. Menachem Begin was the organizer and the arranger of the event. So this anti-terrorist doctrine crystallized around this man's ideology. This man is Israel's most famous terrorist, by the way. And he launched the propaganda offensive in July 1979. At the Jerusalem conference, Ian Black wrote for the Jerusalem Post. He said, the conference organizers expect the event to initiate a major anti-terrorist offensive. And Menachem Begin is in the Likud party, and the Likud ideology stands for a greater Israel, an Israel comprised of only Jewish people, and that the notion there called Eretz Israel, that's the biblical notion of the land of Israel. So they dream of this larger state of Israel going from Iraq to Egypt, from Lebanon, including Cyprus in some cases, down into Saudi Arabia. And this is a quote from the thesis about that conference. He said, unwilling to change its policies and resisting the pressure of world opinion, the Israeli government launched a propaganda war to avoid confronting the issue of Palestinian self-determination. Relaxation of superpower hostility would trigger a thaw in U.S.-Soviet relations and lead to a settlement of the Palestinian issue, which was a development that the Menachem Begin administration wished to avoid at all costs. This is why we have this hostility between the United States and Russia. It's artificial. It's being imposed on us by the media and by the Zionists who don't want the United States and Russia to be on friendly terms, because when the United States and Russia are on friendly terms, they will then say, we'll cooperate, let's solve the problem in the Middle East. Then the attention will be on Israel. What will Israel do? They'll be stuck. They'll have to make a settlement. They don't want to settle. Here's the founder of Likud, Menachem Begin. He was born in Russia in 1913, came to Palestine in 1942, became the leader of the Irgun, which is one of the Zionist militias, which was a terrorist group. He ordered the bombing of the King David Hotel in 1946, created the Likud in 1973, and became prime minister in 1977. And as soon as he became prime minister, he invaded Lebanon, in which something like 20,000 people were killed. Here he is speaking about the time when he blew up the King David Hotel. That's the King David Hotel there being blown up. It's a situation, an event very, very similar to 9/11. I can't go into details now, but it's very similar to 9/11. It was meant to destroy evidence. It was British military headquarters. And here you see this idea on the emblem of the Irgun. You see this notion of the larger state of Israel. That's their society. And then when he blew the King David Hotel, 93 people were killed. It is the worst terror atrocity between Israelis and Palestinians in history. And here again is this Eretz Israel and the symbol of Irgun. And it says here in Hebrew, Rakach, which means only by the gun will the Jews regain this land of Eretz Israel. And Menachem Begin was the head of the Irgun. The Irgun comes from Betar, comes from Jabotinsky. Vladimir Jabotinsky is the head of what they call the New Zionist Organization. He was in New York in 1940. He died in New York in 1940, and organization was then taken over by Mr. Netanyahu's father. So just so you understand the connection between Netanyahu, Begin, and Jabotinsky, that's important. These people don't want peace. They want the whole piece of the Middle East. And here's what Begin said when the United Nations partitioned Palestine in 1947. This is what Begin said: Eretz Israel will be restored to the people of Israel, all of it and forever. This is the ideology of the Likud. This is what Mr. Netanyahu believes to this day. This is what all the members of the Likud party. So when you look at Israel politics today, you have to understand it is far, far, far to the right. It's very far to the right. We have nothing like that in Europe. And they're not looking for peace. They're looking for the whole pie. And they talk about expelling Arabs all the time, expelling Palestinians. Menachem Begin was the father of terrorism. That's not me calling him that. He called himself that. He was interviewed by this journalist from Britain, Mr. Howe, who asked him, how does it feel, in the light of all that's going on, to be the father of terrorism in the Middle East? He said, in the Middle East, Begin said, in all the world. And after the conference in 1979 that Begin instituted, Netanyahu instituted, this man, Netanyahu, went on a crusade, writing books about fighting terrorism on the Western Wing, in which he talks about that, basically he says this, that Israel is attacked by terrorists is because it is a part of the West. Not because of any problem with Palestinians, but because it's a Western nation with Western values. And the Arabs don't like Western values, so they attack Israel, he says. But he says, therefore, the terrorism is really a plague on the West. Therefore, the United States has to lead the West into war against these terrorists and the nations that support them. That's what he says. That's what he believes. And that's what we're doing. Yitzhak Shamir was the head of a group called the Lehi, or the Stern Gang, which was involved in filming Copenhagen in 1948. Swedish. He was the United Nations mediator in Palestine. He was sent there after the partition plan of 1947 to try and make some sort of way that these people could live together. He was killed by this man's group, by Shamir's group. Gangster stuff, machine gun in his car. And a member of that group was this man's father. This is Rami Manuel. He's mayor of Chicago, my hometown right now. And his father was a member of that group that killed Olga Bernadotte. And this man, his son, served in the Israeli army, and his son was the special advisor to Bill Clinton for 8 years, and then he was the chief of staff for Barack Obama. So you see that our presidents always have some sort of Mossad advisor, Israeli advisor, who's telling them what to do, who to appoint in positions. In that way, our leaders are not leading, they're being led. This is a prediction made by the head of the Mossad back in he was the head of the Mossad from the very beginning. His name is Isser Harel. And in 1980, he made this prediction to an American Zionist. He said, the Zionist asked, do you think terrorists will come to America? And if so, where and why? And he goes and says, yes, New York City is a symbol of freedom and capitalism. It is likely that the Arabs, will strike the Empire State Building, your tallest building, and a symbol of your power. And lo and behold, 21 years later, that's what happened. This is the man he made a prediction to about the same time, 1979. His name is Michael Evans. He's a Jewish guy who has a Zionist website, church, Texas-type church, Christian Zionist. And you can see he's very buddy-buddy with Menachem Begin. Now, behind this war on terror, there has to be a reason for it. And the reason is that there's got to be a strategy. There's got to be a strategic plan. The strategic plan is an Israeli plan called the Allot plan, to balkanize the Middle East. Balkanize is what we did to Yugoslavia. The NATO went in there, destroyed the power of Yugoslavia, and broke it up into like 7 little countries that are all very weak and poor. That's the plan. That's called balkanization. That's the plan for the Middle East. And it's the Allot plan. It's the master plan to dominate the region. So what we've done in Iraq, for example, we've broken the country into 3 pieces. Kurdistan in the north, the Sunni area to the west, which is ISIS country right now, and the Shiite area in the south. We're doing the same thing in Syria. That's the name of the game in Syria. They've done it to Libya. They've done it to Sudan. They're doing it in Yemen. They're doing it everywhere. Conquer and divide. And the Allot plan is the plan to control the Middle East and to make Israel the most powerful state in the region. And furthermore, when all of the countries are broken up by ethnic group, then Israel will be no different from them. They'll say, well, Israel's a nation for the Jews, you're the nation for the Shiites, you're the nation for the Alawites. We're all in together. But we're the most powerful. We're the ones with nuclear bombs. And this is the map of the ethnic groups of these countries and how they tend to break up. And important to note here is that this is the oil of northern Iraq is in the Sunni area here, as I showed you in Kirkuk. And that oil is owned by a company which is controlled by the Rothschild family. The U.S. war in Syria is the best way to help Israel. This is one of the leaked emails from Hillary Clinton back in 2012. And she said in this email, she said the best way to help Israel is to use force in Syria to overthrow the government. So that email clearly shows that this is not being done. The American warmongering in Syria, the American struggle to overthrow the government of Syria, is not being done for any American interest. It's being done for an Israeli interest. So America is basically waging war on behalf of another state. And this picture of this poor boy of Aleppo. But this poor boy would not be suffering, and all the millions of Syrians that are suffering would not be suffering if the United States were not arming the factions who are fighting the government. And here you see that in 2011, Barack Obama began efforts to overthrow the government of Syria, of Bashar al-Assad, putting the CIA in charge of operations and spending $1 billion a year to overthrow and to arm the anti-government forces in Syria. Here's the John Forbes Kerry, the Prime Minister, the Secretary of State, who said that, if Assad thinks he's going to just carve out Aleppo and a piece of the country, his own country, by the way, I've got news for you and for him. This war doesn't end. You're going to say, as long as Assad is there, the opposition is not going to stop fighting him, one way or the other. Well, he should know the money and the weapons are coming from the U.S. State Department to those opposition fighters. Here we have a U.S. senator who illegally entered Syria back a few years ago to meet with some of these guys who are running the opposition. And this fellow back here, who's hiding in the shadows, looks very much like to be Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. This is a picture of him when he was in Camp Buka. Here's U.S. troops fighting a year ago in Syria. So they don't talk about it very much in the U.S. newspapers, but American forces are fighting in Syria against the government of Syria. Just the other day, they bombed, Syrian army, killed a bunch of them. again, the Zionist plan. So the question is the United States waging Israel's wars? This is a journalist, Linda Hurd, expert on the Middle East. She said, there is one thing that we do know. Oded Yinon's plan, Zionist plan for the Middle East, is in large part taking shape. Is this coincidence? Was Yinon a gifted psychic? Perhaps. Here's the point. Alternatively, we in the West are victims of a long-held agenda, not of our making, and without doubt, not in our interests. And this is what we've done. We've laid waste to half a dozen countries across the region. Now, the U.S. military commanders knew back in 1948, before Israel became a state, they knew that if the Zionists took Palestine and created a state in Palestine, that, as they say, Zionist strategy will seek to involve the United States in a continuously widening and deepening series of operations intended to secure maximum Jewish objectives. Their words, not mine. And on the side there, you see what a couple of those objectives were. The key objectives were the expansion of Eretz Israel into Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, and the establishment of Jewish military and economic hegemony over the entire Middle East. You might recall that 50 years ago, Israel invaded Syria and took the Golan Heights. Now, they took the Golan Heights because the Golan Heights have a lot of water. They need the water. And they have no intention of getting that back. Now, if they destroy Syria in this war that they're waging right now, if Syria ceases to become a country no longer, there will be no return address for the Golan Heights. And Israel's annexation will not be challenged. And it'll take whatever it wants. And this has been Israel's strategic goal since 1948. This is what the Prime Minister then said. We should prepare to go over on the offensive with the aim of smashing Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria. He said this just 10 days after Israel became a state, a week after Israel became a state. Very aggressive little state. I should point out also that he was a Rothschild employee in the wine field of Rishon LeZion, the first settlement in Israel, in Palestine, paid for by the Rothschild family. Now, a week after 9/11, this general, Wesley Clark, went to the Pentagon, and he was told about this memo to wage war in 7 countries and to overthrow 7 countries in 5 years. He said, about 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon, and I saw Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz. And one of the generals called me and said, sir, we made the decision we're going to war with Iraq. And Wesley Clark said, we're going to war with Iraq? Why? The general said, I don't know. And Clark went back 2 weeks later, and by that time we were bombing Afghanistan. He said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And the general said, oh, sir, it's much worse than that. We're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq, then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off with Iran. And as you can see, 5 or 6 of those countries are already done. The one that's left is Iran. So he seems to have gotten the memo pretty straight. Well, who was creating these memos? Whose plan was this that was being, pushed onto the Pentagon? Well, these are the Defense Policy Board guys. Paul Wolfowitz, Deputy Secretary of Defense, Comptroller of the Pentagon, Dov Zakon, and Douglas Feig. They comprise members of something called the Defense Policy Board. These are the people who create the policy that the Pentagon then fulfills. The Pentagon is basically, and the U.S. military is basically guys that just do what they're told. They said your mission, they call at night, show up at the base, we're going after another country. They don't know where they're going. They don't know why they're going there. They're trained to kill. That's what they do. These are the guys who determine who they're going to kill. So for 15 years, the controlled media has pushed the false narrative of 9/11 and the war on terror, all the while suppressing the real evidence that disproves the official myth. So we live in the United States and in Western Europe. We live in a society where we are basically enslaved to a pack of lies. We've been given a pack of lies from 9/11. And those lies tell us that we have to then go to war in these places, and we duly go to war in those places. We're enslaved to a deception. That's not progressive. That's not free. That's not what free people do. But the media has us by our brains, which is why there's very few people kicked tonight. 1983, the Israelis began creating the Enemy for the War on Terror. It was a group called Libya and Syria. He's the leader. This is him right here. This is from a recent protest in Afghanistan. And they say, imposing the vicious gang of Gulbadim on our people is another crime of the U.S. government. And I'll get to that about how the United States and Saudi Arabia, with Israel, created the group that became Al-Qaeda. It started with this guy, Gulbadim Hekmatyar. You know, the Russians came into Afghanistan, the Red Army came in, and there were the Mujahideen who were fighting back against the Red Army. In 1979, it all started. These are some of the Pashtuns, these are some of the Afghan resistance fighters in Pakistan or Afghanistan. In 1983, the CIA began arming these Mujahideen fighters. Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Pakistan were the agency's allies. This is the American congressman from Texas who got the CIA to fund it, and his name is Charlie Wilson, and he was very shaking hands with Gulbadim and Hekmatyar. Now, the strange thing is that the United States and Saudi Arabia were paying for this. The Israelis were giving them the weapons from Lebanon. The Israeli trainers who spoke Arabic were training the Arab fighters in this Gulbadim and Hekmatyar group. But they were training the most anti-Western group out there. Why would the United States and Israel be training anti-Western Arab Muslim fighters? Because they were creating the enemy for the next war. And how it worked, it all went through Mossad, of course. This this man here, was the station chief for Washington, D.C. for Mossad. He was friends with the congressman since 1973, and Zvi Rafia used Charlie Wilson's office as if it were his own. And the quote is from the book, Charlie Wilson's War. Rafia always acted as if he owned Wilson's office. This is a congressional office. It's big like this building. I mean, a congressman has a big office. A lot of staff. And one of the staffers kept a list of what he needed, of people he needed to lobby. He would use the phones, give projects to the staff. The group became infested with Afghan Arabs, like this man here, the CIA operative Osama bin Laden. And in 1984, this man became friends and working with Gulbadim Hekmatyar. Now, of course, the Afghan Gulbadim Hekmatyar is an Afghan. These guys are Arabs. They don't speak the same language. But this man was the head of Israeli military intelligence at the time, 1983-85. Amman's military intelligence. And his men were training these guys in Pakistan. They were training them in weapons, how to create cells, and terrorism. How to create bicycles that explode, car bombs, what have you. And this was Osama bin Laden's first training. This is a Hebrew-speaking double agent. Ostensibly, he's an Egyptian. He probably is an Egyptian, but he's a Hebrew-speaking double agent, and he was the first trainer. And he's the one who set up the cell that blew up the American embassies in Africa. Well, he was finally busted by the United States. He'd been trained in America, too. And he was put in a federal penitentiary for life for blowing up American embassies. And he disappeared without a trace from a U.S. federal penitentiary. How does that happen? And then in 1994, when these guys were dismissed by Saudi Arabia and Iraq or Pakistan, they went and they became Al-Qaeda and Taliban. Now, of course, the Taliban is the Afghan part. Al-Qaeda is the Arab part. Now, the Israeli military trainers were obviously speaking not Pashto, they were speaking Arabic. So the Israelis were primarily training the Afghan Arabs who spoke Arabic. They were creating the group that became Al-Qaeda. And Al-Qaeda in Arabic means the base, but what it really means is basically the database. The database of all these men that they trained became the database. Then in 1993, there was a bombing at the World Trade Center. This was basically done to convince the American people that Arabs were trying to blow up the World Trade Center. It happened in February 1993, and it was investigated and prosecuted by Michael Chertoff. You'll come across that name again. He was the district attorney for the state of New Jersey, and it was prosecuted by the judge, or it was overseen by the judge Mukasey. These are very active Zionist agents in the United States. Michael Chertoff went on to become the Assistant Attorney General when 9/11 happened. he was responsible for the investigation of 9/11. So here's, they blamed it on this blind sheikh here. The man is known as the blind sheikh. And it was, the whole thing was basically set up by this man. This is an Egyptian colonel named Ahmad Saleh. And Ahmad Saleh, this man was paid $1 million for his testimony, in which he basically, blamed everything on this guy and his partners. So these guys were sent to jail for like 1,000 years. And this guy was given $1 million and a new name and was in California. Someplace like that. But the purpose of this was to convince Americans that Muslims want to destroy the Twin Towers. Then another aspect of mediation is that these think tanks, like this one, they did a study group on catastrophic terrorism in which they imagined the transforming event that will change America. I want to point out that the authors of this paper, it was headed by Ashton Carter, John Deutsch, and the head of the whole thing was Philip Zelikow. Philip Zelikow was therefore the head of the catastrophic terrorism study group that predicted that something like 9/11 would happen any day now. And this was published in the Foreign Affairs magazine in December 1998. The people that wrote it along with Zelikow were Ashton Carter and John Deutsch. He's a Jewish guy born in Belgium who became the head of the CIA for a while. This guy, Ashton Carter, became the Secretary of Defense under Barack Obama. What's important is when these guys wrote this paper about catastrophic terrorism, they were working for the Rothschild family. Their company is called Global Technology Partners. These are the partners. But it's an exclusive affiliate of Rothschild North America. The purpose of the company is to get investments in the huge amount of money that flows in the defense industry in the United States. The United States currently spends something like $660 billion a year on weapons. So there's a lot of money to be made there. Another group that talked about catastrophic terrorism coming to the United States was this Project for the New American Century, headed by these people here, the Kagan family. And they did a paper in September 2000, which these guys all signed on to. And it said that the process, they called for the transformation of the American military into becoming a global force and dominating the Middle East. And they wrote in this paper that the United States will have to invade Afghanistan, or Iraq, whether Saddam Hussein is on the throne or not. The point is that they said that these changes are going to come slowly, unless something like a catastrophic catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor, happens. It'll force the American people to accept this new reality. A year later, of course, they won it, 9/11. So 9/11 became the spark plug that allowed all of these carefully laid plans to come to fruition. The war on terror happened the next week. All of the things that the Kagans called for became reality. So the plans were made. It was like the bonfire was all built, gassed up, ready to go. All it needed was a light. And this was the light. And as they said, all that was left of the World Trade Center was steel and dust. The media presented it as being a very simple thing. Arabs hijacked some planes, flew in the buildings all fell down. You saw it? That's what happened, right? But as I said, Larry Johnson said, we don't have anything in history to compare with this. The only thing that comes close to it is a former Soviet intel operation. Meaning it was very complicated, very sophisticated. He's talking about the fact that these 19 hijackers had multiple identities. Multiple identities. Before the towers even fell that day, this man appeared, Ehud Barak, Israel's former head of military intelligence, the guy who trained Osama bin Laden, remember? He appeared on TV in the London studio before the towers even fell. And he said, the world will never be the same from today on. He said, we know who's behind this. He said, this is basically Osama bin Laden. He said, now it's time for the United States to lead the West to launch an operational, concrete war against terror. And George Bush read from the same script. He said that, we were attacked for our way of life and our freedoms. On September 12th, this man, Bibi Netanyahu, spoke in Israel and he said, we must build a coalition against terror today when our power is unmatched. because tomorrow it could be matched. It's time to take on militant Islamic regimes with a great deal of strength. Now, he's talking about building a coalition, but if you look at those flags on the coalition, you don't see an Israeli flag up there, do you? Israel is nowhere to be seen because they're the ones who are calling the shots. They're the ones who are providing the information. They're the ones who are interpreting the Middle East for us. George Bush on September 20th said he declared war on terror in a joint session of Congress. He said, every nation and every region has a decision to make. Either you're with us or you're with the terrorists. And the Danish Prime Minister was very quick to say, we're with you. I want to point out a little detail here is that this man here is Speaker of the House. He's number 3 in the order of President, Vice President, Speaker of the House. This man is a known pedophile who was paying millions of dollars, hush money, to the boys that he had abused. Now, the connection between Ehud Barak and Netanyahu is that they were commanders. Ehud Barak, here with sunglasses, was Netanyahu's commander in a commando force, secret commando force called the Sayeret Matkal, which is an independent commando force in Israel that serves directly under Israeli military intelligence, chief of staff, intelligence. And there were other people from the Sayeret Matkal who were involved in 9/11. For example, on Flight 11, Daniel Levin was sitting right behind the hijackers, whoever they were. On 9/11, the New York Times asked Mr. Netanyahu, how will this affect Israeli-American relations? And he said, it's very good. He said, well, it's not very good, but it will generate immediate sympathy. Now, on September 11th, it was thought that 30,000 people were dead in the World Trade Center. Who would say that it's very good that 30,000 people are dead, except somebody who saw some benefit to be gained from this? And he saw benefit, all right. A few years later, he spoke in Hebrew at a university in Israel, and he said, we Israelis are benefiting from one thing, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers and Pentagon and the American struggle in Iraq. Point out that Bibi Netanyahu was the head of the Likud party since 1993. He was also very close to the man who owned the buildings. This is Larry Silverstein here, and every week, every Sunday afternoon, these two men had a conversation on the phone. What were they talking about? Football? It turns out that this is, of course, this is the godfather of the war on terror, and this is the man who owned all 3 buildings that fell down that day. There's a connection. Here is Larry Silverstein on the day, July 24th, about 5 weeks before 9/11. He became the owner. He got the 99-year lease for the World Trade Center. And he's very close to, of course, Ehud Olmert, who was the Deputy Prime Minister of Israel at the time, and Mayor of Jerusalem. What's curious, though, is that this man, Ehud Olmert, who's now in prison in Israel for about a year, Ehud Olmert was in New York City on 9/11, but it was kept out of the news. Very unusual. When the Prime Minister or the Deputy Prime Minister of Israel goes to America, it's usually front page news. But in this case, it was kept out. About 2 weeks later, he came back to New York and acted as, Giuliani's big brother, helping him out. But the question is Ehud Olmert was in New York City on September 10th and 11th. Why was his visit kept secret? What was he there for? So the 9/11 cover-up is the essential part of the deception. The ultimate purpose of the terror atrocity of 9/11 was to deceive the public into supporting the war on terror. Here's Philip Zelikow, the man who was the head of the catastrophic study report. He became the author of this 9/11 Commission report. He wrote the outline. He actually had the whole outline with all the bullet points listed before the group even came together, before the appointed officials even came together. And he showed it to the other commissioners, and he showed the commissioners, look, it's already. And he said, well, it doesn't look good. It looks like it's already been written, It doesn't look good, so we'll keep it secret. Here he is, and when he studied his master's degree, or his PhD, thesis was on the creation and maintenance of the public myth. It's how the public needs a myth to absorb, like a saga, a myth. These are the appointed officials who worked on the commission, and they're confused. They said, to this day, we don't know why NORAD, that's the North American air defense system. Why they told us what they told us, it was just so far from the truth. They were being lied to. They knew they were being lied to. Here's the senior counsel for the 9/11 Commission. He said, what government and military officials told Congress, the Commission, the media, and the public about who knew what when was almost entirely and inexplicably untrue. So, now we've gone into the latest phase of the war on terror, fighting this group. But what's peculiar about this group is that everything that comes to us about this group comes to us from Israelis. The Israelis provide the videos, for example. Here's a video of one of these ISIS or Al-Qaeda type people coming from a group called Site Intelligence Group. It stands for Search for International Terrorist Entities. And it's an Israeli-run operation in Virginia, or in Maryland, run by an Israeli Mossad lady called Rita Katz. And she claims to get these videos directly from the terrorists, and then she sells them to CNN and Fox News and the CIA. The CIA needs to know about ISIS too, so she sells it to them. She gets paid for it. Here she is, Rita Katz, born in Basra, Iraq. Her father was a Mossad spy who was sent in Iraq. Founded and went to Israel. And this is from she's speaking to CNN News, and she said, she's talking about one of these beheading videos, and she said, within a short time after our release of the video, she said, ISIS account on social media indicated that within a short time, they would be releasing the video. Only we actually had the video beforehand and were able to beat them with the release. Now, how does her little Israeli website in Virginia have a copy of the video before it's been released by ISIS? You see, this shows that these two operations are connected at the hip. Here's another one of these videos, and Site Intelligence, and she's saying that they're putting words in this guy's mouth. They're saying that he's calling on Muslims to kill Europeans, especially the spiteful and filthy French. Smash his head with a rock, or slaughter with a knife, or run over with a car. He said, according to Site Intelligence Group. So you see, we are being propagandized by a military agency of a country that is involved in the fight. This is not neutral. This is not some sort of objective information that you should be giving to the U.S. intelligence. This is pure propaganda. They even come up with this video here in which this man is clearly not Osama bin Laden. But this is the infamous video where they get this guy here with the dark beard and they call him Osama bin Laden. And in this case, the video aired on hundreds of Western news sites and websites a full day before it was released by the Al-Qaeda people. So, why does 9/11 truth matter? It matters because the government, our government, continues to lie about what happened to this day. My government, your government, the Norwegian government, the Swedish government, they're all in together. None of them stand up for truth. And none of our media stands up for truth. The Americans know they're being lied to. They did some polls, for the first few years after 9/11. And in 2006, they found that the number of people who believed the government was decreasing by 9/11 year after year. It was decreasing. So they found in 2006 that only 16% of the American population thought the government was telling the truth about 9/11. So what they do then, they stop polling. Because the numbers were going slower and lower and lower. See, this is the number, this is the percentage of the population who believed the government in 2006. They're falling. And this is the number of things they're mostly lying, and this is saying they're mostly telling the truth but hiding something. So if the government and media are lying about 9/11, it means that the government and media are controlled by the same people who carried out 9/11. That's a very serious position we're in. Here's the North Tower being struck on the first event of the day. You see this incredibly large explosion going out the side here with this lot of white smoke coming out here. The first plane went into a computer room. Both planes actually went into secure computer rooms. They went into rooms that were occupied with these huge boxes of computers and batteries and things like that. Computer centers. Data centers. And it went into, I want to point out, it went into the office or the computer room of Marshall McLennan. Marshall McLennan was the employer of the man who then went and ran Iraq. When we occupied Iraq, his name was Jerry Bremer, Louis Bremer. And he was the man who was sent over there in the Coalition Provisional Authority. He was the guy who walked around and ran Iraq for 3 or 4 years. he was working for this company where the first plane went. How amazing. Here's the second plane. I want to point out, I'm pointing out some of the anomalies. You see, this plane is supposed to be of United Airlines Flight 175, but it's got something strange, a strange object attached to the bottom of the plane, which fires something into the building just before the plane hits. These photographs show you that just before the plane struck the building, something was fired from beneath the plane into the building. And these are from various Spiegel TV, what have you. So that tells us one thing. That tells us for sure that this was not Flight 175. Because Flight 175, United Airlines does not carry missiles on the bottom of the plane. And this is a very important photograph because it shows that that missile opened up a white-hot hole in the building, which allowed the plane to enter the building. You know, the plane just went right into this white-hot hole. Now, this missile was obviously carrying a warhead, a pyrophoric warhead, like depleted uranium or tungsten, which is very, very, very hot, burns in the air, and when it hits a building like this, it's burning about 6,000 degrees Celsius. So this white heat is extremely hot. So anything that enters the building, of course, will burn very fast. And as they said, all of the fuel on the planes burned in the first few seconds, obviously. And you want to point out here, this is another interesting thing, is that you see this almost pure white smoke on the outside at the first evidence of explosion. This is strongly indicative of thermite. When thermite explodes, when thermite burns, it creates white smoke, which is called aluminum oxide, kind of like those chemtrails in the sky. And it creates incredibly hot temperatures. And here you see, this is where the plane went into the building. This is South Tower. Plane went in here. You see this tremendous and energetic and hot explosion coming out the back side here. This is not kerosene. Kerosene burns like this. Kerosene is dark orange flame with black carbon around the outside over here on the far side. This is an explosion. This is something else. And that missile that went into the building has to come up the other side. And there it is, coming out very fast, burning white hot, and leaving behind a trail of dark oxide. That's not part of the airplane. So a DU warhead, depleted uranium warhead, is pyrophoric. This is what they call the silver bullet in the United States arsenal today. They use it all the time. They used it in Yugoslavia. They used it in Iraq. It's uranium. It's depleted uranium. That doesn't mean anything. It's poisonous as hell. And it cuts through anything. It'll go right through a tank. Nothing can stop it. It burns in the air, and it burns at temperatures above 6,000 degrees Celsius. This makes it ideal for piercing armor and incendiary weapons. And there you see it burning white hot coming out the far side. This was quite a warhead. And here's another picture of it. I pointed out, and I sent these photographs to my scientist at the Lawrence Livermore Lab in California, a man who had worked on Manhattan Project all the way through Star Wars, a nuclear physicist. And I said, does this burning object have the characteristics of a depleted uranium warhead, a burning warhead? He said, yes, it does. And this is one of the engineers who looked at the remains of the World Trade Center, and he came up with this piece of steel from a box column at a very high level. It was the 82nd floor, or up there near the top where the plane went in. And he said it looked like the plane went in and took a bite out of this column. And he says the bite we see is the curve of the engine or the fuselage. I beg to differ. The fuselage or the engine would not do that to a piece of steel, but depleted uranium warhead would. It cuts right through it. Which I'm glad for Mr. Astana that he's wearing gloves here. Because if he were touching that with his bare hand, he would be sick very soon. So what we see in the South Tower is that just before it fell, for the 7 minutes before it fell, there was a thermic reaction going on right here on the 81st floor. The plane came out this side. This is where the plane exited from the building. And we see this thermic reaction going on here, very violent, creating a lot of white smoke. This is an Associated Press photograph. And that's a reaction of thermite. And what thermite does is it creates the white smoke, creates extremely hot temperatures of about 2,500 degrees Celsius, and it creates molten iron, or molten lead, or whatever the oxidizer is in the case. It's probably molten iron in this case, and as we see that for 7 minutes before the building fell, it was cascading falling like Victoria Falls. And this is from WABC TV. This is not from some alternative website. This is ABC television. But the mainstream media never, ever, ever talks about this subject, because this one piece of evidence alone disproves their entire story. Because there's nothing in the official story that can account for temperatures that high. And then after 7 minutes, the building all fell apart and pulverized. And this is exactly where that stuff was falling, right here. This is the east corner. It's falling from there. And this is the same tower, South Tower, going down. What happened is that the top tilted, and then it exploded, it pulverized from the top down. And as you see, this is extremely energetic. That is to say that whatever was going on in the building here, it was throwing things out sideways with huge force. This is not a gravitational collapse. This is not a collapse, a fall. This is a building being exploded downwards, faster than the speed of fall, free fall. This building and the other building fell faster than they would fall in normal free fall. And completely pulverized. Completely pulverized. And these huge I call them pyroclastic flows. Pyroclastic flow is like from a volcano. When Mount Etna, for example, when it flows, when these pyroclastic flows come off a volcano, they contain lava. In this case, they contain molten iron. Huge amount. This is the molten iron that was found in those clouds. At least 6% by volume contain these little iron balls, little balls of iron. Here you see a lot of them. That's in the dust. And these were created at temperatures hotter than 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit, obviously. That's the melting point of steel, of iron. There's only one explanation for this. Thermal. Nanothermal. As Niels Hart said in this room 2 years ago. Another thing they found in the dust of the World Trade Center was molybdenum. Little balls of molybdenum. But molybdenum has a much higher temperature of melting than iron. It melts at 4,700 degrees or 2,600 degrees Celsius. But when they discovered this in the dust, they couldn't even put it in the book, the U.S. Geological Survey, because it's so extreme. It's so beyond the pale. They couldn't put it in because there's no place for it. But obviously, whatever happened to the World Trade Center created molten molybdenum. This is what did it. As I said, thermite is made out of, the fuel is aluminum. The oxidizer is a metal oxide. And at the very top here, we have the very first one is called aluminum and molybdenum trioxide. And what this is from the U.S. military. This shows you just with basic thermites that they have this huge energy potential greater than that of high explosives. Which is to say that for volume, for mass, thermite has more energy than explosives. And this is what Niels Hart and Stephen Jones found in the dust of the World Trade Center. This is thermite made using nanotechnology. And nanotechnology is when you reduce things down to extremely small particles and then mix them uniformly. So you're putting basically molecule next to molecule. So that means that the area, the surface area of the explosion, the reaction, is infinitesimally greater than just sand, mixing sand. So the reaction becomes explosive, extremely powerful. And this is what it looked like under a microscope. This is the stuff that Niels Hart discovered along with Stephen Jones. And it was a bi-layered material, red layer on the top, gray layer on the bottom. When they heated it up to 430 degrees Celsius, it went bang and created a little drop of molten iron and a little puff of white smoke. Thermite was also used to cut the stems of the building, the columns that held up the building. Each World Trade Center building had 47 columns that held up the building. These big box columns. Excuse me. These big box columns. With the walls of which were 10 centimeters thick at the base. And as it got higher and higher up, they taper, thin. So at the very top, they were only a 1/4 inch thick, the walls. But at the bottom, they were 4 inches thick. And they held up the building. Now, the buildings would not fall unless all of these stems were cut. And here you can see how they were cut. They were cut with charges that basically cut them, melted this steel. Here you have another one that was cut with like another kind of charge at an angle. It was cut like that. So that means that the top would just slide down. And all of these had to be cut at the same time. And then, underneath the World Trade Center, there was extremely hot fires going. Not fires, they're reactions. But these fires, the pile was extremely hot until Christmas of 2001, for 3 months. Now, the poor firefighters and first responders who walked on the pile were breathing in the smoke, which contained huge amounts of nanoparticles. Nanoparticles are only created from fires that are hotter than the boiling point of the metal involved. So I wrote an article, Why Did Iron Boil Beneath the World Trade Center? I was attacked for that article. Basically, I was, that was the beginning and the end for me. Because it proved that the official version was false. Because there's no way you can account for fires beneath the World Trade Center burning in oxygen-starved environments, creating nanoparticles in fires in temperatures hotter than the boiling point of the metal involved. And these poor fellas were inhaling all those nanoparticles. So, last count that I heard, 1,600 firefighters have died of cancer. There are 5,700 more who are dying of cancer. This is the thin blue smoke, and this was tested by one man from the University of California. Sent a detector, kind of a drum, and when the smoke blew through that drum, the drum would analyze the size of the particles and what they were. And after he sent the drum to New York and was set up on the roof, he went there in October to check on it, and he was met at the airport by the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. It doesn't protect any environment. They said, who asked you to do it? Who's paying for it? They didn't like it, because the EPA told the people of New York the air is safe to breathe. The air was anything but safe to breathe. The air was extremely toxic. The one blessed thing about this fire is it was so hot that most of this stuff went up high and then out to sea, rather than, hitting the lungs of the people of New York. The problem with nanoparticles is that they're so small. If you inhale them, I learned this from depleted uranium. The same thing happens to the soldiers. If you breathe in the nanoparticles, they're so small, they don't stop in your nose or your lungs or your tissue. They go through every membrane of the body until they reach the nucleus of the human cell. And there they lodge themselves in the nucleus of the human cell, and they start causing very big problems, cancer, DNA problems, etc. So as they removed the rubble from the World Trade Center, they found that beneath were extremely hot pools of molten iron. And the firefighters saw it. Firefighters said, you get down below and you see molten steel running down the channel rails like you're in a foundry, like lava, like a volcano. And I spoke to Peter Tully in 2002, who ran the operation to clean up the place, and he said we had found literally molten steel at the base of the World Trade Center. And I said, Mr. Tully, how can you explain molten iron, molten steel at the bottom of the World Trade Center? He said, well, think about all the paper that fell down the elevator shafts. This is ridiculous. This is how they can explain it in their own mind. And this is the third building that fell that day. This building fell down at 5:25 in the afternoon. And it was building number 7. It was an Israeli-built building owned by Larry Silverstein. It was formerly called the Solomon Brothers Building. And it fell straight down into a pile inside its own foundation at 5:25 in the afternoon. And just before it fell, there were people out there with their cameras and journalists outside the building, and these guys, these hard hats, come out of the building and say, see that building there, guys? It's going to come down. Better get out of here. It's coming down. They knew it was coming down. There's a lot of people that were involved in this, and somehow they're all silent. Then there was another strange thing that happened. This is building 6. This is called U.S. Customs House. It's this building right here. Now, I want to point out that this building is obviously burned toast. Building 7 is here, building 1 is here. And look at the street. The street is normally clean. These are hoses and things like that, but the street is clean. That means that neither tower has fallen yet. But this building is burning like a torch. Well, this is the same building, closer up. Look at how it's totally destroyed. Now you've seen that one of the buildings is fallen. Tower 1 or Tower 2 both have fallen down. The building is completely destroyed. What happened there? This is what it looks like from the sky. It's an 8-story building or a 6-story building, I forgot which. And here you see this huge destruction in the middle of the building, crater. And the crater, you can see by the darkness of the green, goes down into the basement. What was in the basement of this building? It was a vault. A vault that contained large amounts of gold, most likely, and a lot of criminal evidence from the big crimes of the 1980s and 1990s, like Enron, and WorldCom, and George Bush's shenanigans with the Black Eagle Trust, where he created $200 billion to take down the Soviet Union. George Papa Bush created a bond set, $200 billion of fraudulent money to take down the ruble in the Soviet Union. And those bonds became due the next day after 9/11. They all disappeared. And this guy discovered, this Kurt Sonnenfeld, he was a videographer with FEMA. He was the only guy that got to go with his camera throughout the rubble. Here he is in the basement of building 6 or one of those buildings. And he said, he now lives in Argentina. He's in exile, like me. And he says, except for several rows of empty shelves, there was nothing in the vault but dust and debris. It had been empty. Why was it empty? And when could it have been empty? He asks. Well, it was obviously empty the night before. Monday was a working day. It was okay on Monday. Tuesday was empty in the morning. And here's the Pentagon, obviously, shortly after it was supposedly hit by a plane, but there's no evidence of a plane, and there's no evidence of a plane entering the building. So the idea that a large Boeing aircraft hit this building is not substantiated by the proof, any evidence. There's no evidence to show it. We're told that a Boeing plane entered like this. This is the exterior wall. I want to point out that the exterior wall of the Pentagon, it's a fortress, is 1 meter thick, concrete and masonry. Thicker than this place. And they were told that this plane came through and went through here and made a hole in the wall here on this ring. It went through 3 rings of the Pentagon. This ring, this ring, this ring. Went through at least 2 exterior walls and left this hole in the wall. But there's a problem with this, you can see from this own diagram, that there's no way that this fuselage can go through here and make this hole in the wall without taking out these columns that are still standing. They're still standing. Not possible. And supposedly this hole in the wall. So what this indicates to us is that this was probably created by another missile. The warhead went through there, wove its way right through those columns, and made this hole in the wall. Extremely very hot. But the thing is, the FBI would not allow any engineers to look at this hole. It's not allowed. It's forbidden. Only the FBI got to go to this part of the building. These guys were part of the first responders who, and you can see that they're protecting themselves. They knew that there was something very toxic in there. So they're wearing, fancy respirators, and they were also being decontaminated when they came out of the building. So the people at the Pentagon knew that they were going into a very toxic environment, and they had treated it with care. The people in New York were not given this luxury. And this, of course, is the hole in the ground in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where we are told that a large Boeing aircraft went into the hole in the ground. I went and spoke to the local paper here, and I wanted to talk to them about how the newspaper covered this story. And they said, sure, Mr. Bollyn, come in on Wednesday at 3 o'clock. I went there, and I was taken into a back room and introduced to a U.S. military guy named Bob Labernight. And I said, why am I talking to you? He said, I've been seconded to the paper to answer your questions. I said, okay, can you tell me why is it that we don't find any part of an aircraft in this hole in the ground? This hole in the ground is only, 7 meters wide and 2 meters deep. And he said, well, it's very simple. He said, that ground was very soft. And when the plane came very fast, and when the plane hit the ground liquefied and swallowed the plane. Now, at the end of the day, Alan Sabrowski, in 2009, he's a former director of studies at the U.S. Army War College. He came out and supported my thesis. This is the first time that somebody of his credentials supported what I've been saying for years. And he said basically this: the evidence trail for 9/11 and the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq runs from PNAC, AIPAC and their cohorts, through the mostly Jewish neocons in the Bush administration, and back to the Israeli government. None of the denials and political machinations can alter that essential reality. That's my thesis, that this was a Zionist operation, and that the U.S. government, U.S. media are basically covering up for a tremendous crime. The crime of our time, the crime of our century. This event changed our reality. And they imposed a false reality on top of it. Are we going to accept that? How long are we going to live in this false reality and serve it? Now, next week is the 50th anniversary of this Israeli attack on the USS Liberty. In the Six-Day War, the Israelis attacked this American ship, which was a spy ship, off the coast of Egypt, and they bombed the hell out of it. They sent a torpedo into it. It was a spy ship, and they sent a torpedo into the ship below the waterline and killed 34 Americans who were listening with headphones and listening to languages, you know. And they wanted to put the ship on the bottom of the sea. There was an exchange that became public now a few years ago between the pilots and Tel Aviv. And they said, Tel Aviv said, identify the ship. They said, it's American, it's American. Tel Aviv said, sink the ship, no survivors. So what these Israeli military boats did is that when the Americans put life rafts into the water to try and get off the ship, the Israelis would shoot the life rafts, which is a war crime, but it doesn't matter. President Johnson covered it up. Lyndon Johnson said, I will not embarrass an ally. This is an ally? This is what an ally does? So some people don't understand that Israel would do something like this. People that come with this Christian Zionist worldview, people who have this you know, Ben-Hur, Exodus view of Israel, they think Israel is holy. Israel would do nothing like this. No. Israel is a political state. Israel does things that it deems to be in its own strategic interest. It's not your friend. It's another nation. You better get mature about this and get wise and realize who you're dealing with. Here are the 19 alleged hijackers. Well, I call them alleged hijackers because we don't know if any plane was actually hijacked on that day. Not a single pilot issued the 7500 code of hijacking. So 4 experienced pilots are all hijacked that day, and not a single one of them does 7500, we've been hijacked. That makes no sense. And of these, 15 of these guys lived in Florida. And of these guys, I think 7 of them had been issued duplicate licenses. They went to the license bureau on Tuesday, got a license, and on Wednesday, they called the license people and said, well, I just moved to a new apartment, I have a new address, can you send me a new license, please? DMV said, yeah, okay, we'll send it to you. Just destroy the old one, okay? In this way, you have 2 people using, for example, his ID. One guy lives here, one guy lives there. Bad system. And other of these people have reported having lost their passports. And as I say, such duplicate documents are used to create false histories. Now, there's another aspect of these hijackers, is that about 7 of them were reported in the week after still being alive. Guys living in Morocco or Saudi Arabia said, this is my picture, this is my birthday, it's my name, but I'm here, I'm fine. I've never been to Ohio or Kentucky or in. No, it's not me. So what we're dealing with is we're seeing that the hijackers on the plane were using false identities. So they were not, the American government has never responded to this. They never denied it. They just don't respond to it. They still say, those are the 19 guys. But those are not the 19 guys. What FBI director said shortly after 9/11, he said, what we're currently doing is determining when these individuals came to the United States, these were their real names, or they changed their names for use with false identification in the United States. And then later, a year later, he said, there's no proof at all to prove the identities of the suicidal hijackers. So at least 7 of them were still alive. So then the question is, like, okay, so who were these people on the planes? Who were these hijackers? Why were they using false identities? And they weren't even hijackers. What were they? This is from a book written by John le Carré. He wrote it with the help of Israeli military intelligence back in 1982. The story is called Little Drummer Girl. And it's about how they frame a Palestinian for attacks on a synagogue in Germany. And Diane Keaton plays the role of this British actress who befriends this Palestinian guy and lays a trail across Europe from Turkey all the way to Germany. Then the bomb goes off. He is blamed for the bomb, and then his body is blown up in a car on the Autobahn. And the Mossad guy, the head Mossad guy, tells Diane Keaton, or in the character, he says, terror is theater. Theater is a con trick. Do you know what that means? Con trick? You've been deceived. And I tell people, to make them feel better about terrorism, is you have to keep that in mind. That the terrorism that you're seeing on your television sets and happening around the world, day after day, most of it is fabricated terrorism. It's actually happening. Sometimes it's not actually happening, but it's usually happening. But it's meant to affect you. It's not meant to kill those people. They didn't kill those 3,000 people on 9/11 because they needed to kill 3,000 people. They killed those people in order to affect the billions of people on the planet and how they feel about this. It's theater. And then Richard Nixon said, you know, it's not the crime that gets you, it's the cover-up. And he should know. Because it's the cover-up where these people expose themselves, whether they're in the media, or they're in the government, or they're in law enforcement. If they're covering up the 9/11 crime, we can see who they are. We know who they are. We know their positions, we know their names. The three crucial elements of a false flag cover-up are investigation. You have to control the investigation. You control the investigation and access to the evidence. Then you control the interpretation, how the event is explained to the public. Thirdly, you control the litigation. That's the court process that happens in order to prevent any legal discovery from coming out in court. First aspect is the person who was responsible for the investigation of 9/11 was Michael Chertoff, our Israeli friend here, whose mother was a Mossad agent. He was the Assistant Attorney General under this man, John Ashcroft, and he was given the dossier, he was given the portfolio to investigate 9/11. But there was no investigation. They called it a war crime. They called it an act of war. So there was no investigation. So then they began promptly destroying the evidence. But wait a minute, 3,000 people died in those buildings, and you're just going to treat it like garbage? That's exactly what they did. And for day-to-day decisions, Chertoff has the last word. So I contacted Mr. Chertoff. I said, Mr. Chertoff, who authorized the destruction? Did you authorize the destruction of the evidence? He said, no. And I said, if you didn't do it, who did? He said, no idea. But that doesn't work. It was his responsibility because the FBI works for him. He was the person who was supposed to prosecute the crimes of 9/11. He was the head prosecutor. And the FBI works underneath him, has to give him the information and the evidence that he uses then to prosecute. And after that successful non-investigation of 9/11, he was awarded and made the head of Homeland Security, where he remained in position of controlling the evidence of 9/11 for another few years. Good-looking fellow. And here he is. This is the interpretation aspect. This is how the media basically feeds us lies day after day. We have in America, 95% of the media outlets in the United States of America are controlled by only 6 companies today. One of the biggest is Fox News, which is headed by this man here, an Australian guy. And he came to America in the 1980s and bought up newspapers from coast to coast. So that when 2003 happened, the war against Iraq, he owned 160 newspapers in the United States. He also owns Fox TV and Wall Street Journal and, you know, Paramount Pictures, and what he doesn't own ain't worth owning. He owns it all. Where does this Australian Jewish guy come with all this money to buy up all the media in America? His friend with deep pockets over here, Rothschild. The Rothschilds create media moguls like this. They probably have done the same thing in this country. They create the media mogul in order to control public opinion. Because, for example, in 2003, when the United States went to war illegally with Iraq, all 160 newspaper editors that he owned agreed with him on the need to invade Iraq. As we now know from the Chilcot inquiry, the invasion of Iraq was completely a war crime for which there was no evidence to support. But all of his newspapers supported it. That means all the people who read those newspapers agreed with it. Yeah, that's probably right. We should go attack Iraq. That's how it works. I want to point out here that these two characters own the oil on the Golan Heights. They own the oil company that has access to the oil on the Golan Heights in Syria. And the Rothschilds own the oil company in Kurdistan, where all that oil is in Kirkuk. They own the oil. And this is the New York Times. This is the pathetic B'nai B'rith newspaper in New York, family-owned newspaper. And this is what they wrote 3 years after 9/11, on the day, September 11th, they said, this is the lead editorial. They said, in the 3 years since 9/11, we've begun to understand that it's possible to know what happened without knowing what happened. Okay. Thank you very much. That's okay, we'll get on with it. This has been the position of the U.S. media all along. They don't ask questions. They don't address the molten metal I showed you. They don't address those little iron balls that are found in the dust. They don't address the extreme heat. They don't address anything. They simply regurgitate this narrative that Osama bin Laden in 1980 did it, and we have to go to war. That's it. That's it. That's not media in a democratic society. A democratic society is supposed to have media that keeps the government in check to prevent such crimes from happening in a democracy. This shows you how far we have gone from the democratic ideal in America and in Western Europe, Canada. The third aspect of this interpretation is the legacy. This is how young kids that weren't even born when 9/11 happened, they go on the school buses and they get off at the World Trade Center and they come and look at this memorial, which was provided and built by an Israeli guy here, a friend of the Netanyahu family. His name is Michael Arad. He's the son of Moshe Arad, the former U.S. and Israeli ambassador to the United States of America. How peculiar that the people who carve into stone the legacy of 9/11 is the same country that is the #1 prime suspect of the crime itself. That's all I can say. And you go to America now, you go to this ground zero, and they have built an obscene mall, shopping mall, with luxury shops in a building called the Oculus, the eye, Oculus. Looks like eyelashes, white eyelashes. And then you can go there and you can buy Gucci bags and everything like that. This is ground zero. And they've engraved the names of the victims around here. And kids go to the memorial and they go to the museum and they come away thinking, Muslims did this to us. Osama bin Laden and all those nasty characters, they did this to us. It's very much like the Holocaust Museum, which is also run, the lady that runs this museum used to run the Holocaust Museum, where young kids go and learn that Germans are very nasty, brutal people who killed 6 million Jews. It's like a myth, a legacy is being given to young kids to take away in their tender little minds. And this is very bad. They're taught that Muslims are bad, Muslims are evil, and they have attacked us. But there's no evidence of that. The final aspect, of course, is the litigation. And this is the judge who oversaw the litigation. There were 3,000 families, basically, who lost somebody. The first 2,900 settled out of court. The remaining 96 went to court. They went into his courtroom. But there was a problem. That the key defendant in the 9/11 tort litigation is this company, ICTS, based in Holland, International Consultants on Targeted Security. They're the company that controls airport security in Europe, in many places, and the United States that day. And they're the ones who were responsible for letting these 19 hijackers on the plane. So they were the 96 families wanted to know, how did these hijackers get on the plane? With weapons, with box cutters, with whatever. That company would have to explain. But there was a conflict of interest, and that is that the son of the judge lives in Israel and is a lawyer in Israel, and he's a lawyer for that very same company that is in his daddy's courtroom in New York City, ICTS. That's called a primary family conflict of interest. It's completely forbidden, of course. But for some reason, nobody in New York questioned it. And I discovered it, brought it out, and it was eventually taken to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the judge, the U.S. Supreme Court, they actually sanctioned the lawyer and the person who brought it forward. They said, this is anti-Semitic. What you're presenting is anti-Semitic. And so it was, of course, thrown out. But this is the relationship. This is Joey Hellerstein, and he's a lawyer with Amit this company here. And they represent Kuckerman, and Kuckerman is Rothschild Group, and they own ICTS. And that's his dad. And so what happened is that this judge basically settled all the cases out of court. So not a single 9/11 family ever got a day in court. And there never will be a day in court because all the cases have been settled. And they were settled with these people. These are very big Zionist figures in America. Ken Feinberg, he was in charge of doling out the money for the first 2,900 families. Then the rest dealt with this woman here, Sheila Birnbaum. And she works very closely with the state of Israel with a law firm called Scandinavian. And she dealt with the last 96 families. And the judge said, the judge would tell the lawyers from the families, said, you know, I'm hearing from Sheila that you're not working fast enough to get settlements. I want these cases settled. Wait, the people, the victims want justice. They want accountability. They want their day in court. The judge and these people were working against that in what I call a war of attrition, in which one family after another was settled out of court until no one was left standing. That's a travesty of justice. This is the last slide. So the question is, why am I doing this? What do we want? You know, am I just picking on Israel? No, no, no. I want an end to this war. I want my old reality back. I want normalcy. I want a democratic state. I want peace in our time. And another guy who wanted peace in our time was John Kennedy. And he said, what kind of peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana enforced on the world by American weapons of war. Not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I'm talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living. The kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and to build a better life for their children. Not merely peace in our time, but peace for all time. Now, we will not have anything like that if we do not disabuse ourselves of the deception of 9/11 and the war on terror. Until that happens, until we stop this, it's not going to stop. I kind of hope that, you know, Donald Trump would bring an end to this. I thought they would kind of like try to get off the stage, you know, gently and just like let that peter out and go away. No, it's not happening. It looks like Donald Trump is not going to just close the lights and say goodbye. It looks like it's going to go on. And he's very aggressive in what he says about Iran. Of course, war with Iran would be disastrous for Europe. War with Russia would be beyond disastrous. So we have to support peace. So I want to thank you very much for coming. And I do have a few copies of this book. This is my little book, Solving 9/11. If you'd like to get a copy of this, I have copies of this for, I asked for 150 crowns. And I will take advantage now of the time to pass around my hat. If you'd like to support my little trip down here to Denmark and my trip back to Sweden, put a few crowns in the hat. I appreciate it. I'll give it to you and pass it around. And now what we can do is I'd be very happy to take your questions and open the discussion. We are not limited to 9:30. We can go for a little longer. So if anybody has some questions or comments, I welcome those.
Yeah, that's right.